All right, let's get this show on the road. So good morning, everyone. My name is Yannick Lefebvre. I write plugins for WordPress. And the topic of my presentation this year is all going to be around some of the business aspects of creating a plugin and getting it out there. Everything it involves, from coding aspects of it to licensing to how you're going to distribute it, free versus paid. So all those types of business decisions and things you need to consider as you're creating your plugin and you want to get it out there to the community. I just wanted to mention quickly, the slides are available on my website, and I'll show the URL again at the very end of the presentation. So if you do want to follow along or be able to review these after the presentation, then they're easy to access. So a little bit about me. So I've been a user of WordPress since 2004, so the very beginnings of the platform. I released my first plugin very quickly in 2005, so I wanted to go in there and add extra functionality that the platform did not offer, so I started to code my own plugins and started to make them available to the community. To date now I have 8 plugins that I've published on the WordPress site, and here's a listing of them. And I've also made a number of private plugins for customers. So one of the things that happens once you get plugins out there is people can be interested in having you create special plugins for their needs. So that'll happen over time. I've also published a book, so I won't go into coding in this presentation, but if you are interested in more the nitty-gritty of how to create plugins using WordPress, my book is all step-by-step recipes that will show you how to go about creating plugins from the ground up and learning all the APIs in WordPress. So my 2 goals today in this presentation, the first one is to educate potential developers to know what they need to go through, what they need to think about if they want to get their plugins out there. My other goal is to for users to make you appreciate the work that goes into getting a plugin out there. I mean, if you're a user or an integrator, you go on the site, you pick up a plugin, you install it, everything's fine and you're happy, but this can make you understand a little bit more everything that the developer on the back end is doing as they're creating these plugins. So, as I mentioned, the main topics I'll go over, first of all, we'll talk about finding your inspiration. So how do you figure out what you're going to create as a plugin? Then we're going to talk about coding up your masterpiece and all the different things you need to consider as you're writing up your code. We're going to talk about promoting your work. So what can you do to get your work out there? What can you do to make your plugin look good amongst other plugins? We're going to talk about monetization strategies. So you may want to make a bit of money on this. So how can you make money with plugins? And talking about supporting your community. Once it's out there, what do you need to consider when you have people using your code? So finding your inspiration, the very first thing if you're going to set out and create a plugin is figure out, well, what am I going to do my plugin on? I mean, after all, there's a lot of plugins out there, but you might have the idea of what could be written, what could be added to WordPress to be able to make it do leaps and bounds. The very first place you can consider, if you've already been building sites with WordPress, is to think about code that you've often put inside of your functions.php file. So if you have a block of code that you always bring in when you're starting a new project for a customer, well, there may be a chance that packaging that code up into a plugin and releasing it to the public could help other people out there who have the same kind of needs that you do. Another one would be a customer plugin that, of course, one that you're allowed to release, but something you've written for a customer if you have their agreement that, well, yes, this really helped you on your site, but the larger community could benefit from having access to that code. That could be a very good starting point to be able to take that and bring it out to the community. The other one, well, finding a need that comes up often on the WordPress.org forum. So if you're navigating amongst those sites, there's often people that are looking for a plugin to do something. Well, if you see conversations about a need and there is no good plugin out there to suit that need, well, maybe that could be the opportunity for you to come in and be able to create that plugin to fulfill that task. And the last one could be there is no good plugin out there to be able to do what you're looking for. So you've already searched for a plugin that did something, you couldn't find a good one. Well, maybe you're the one who could go in and create that wonderful plugin to be able to achieve that specific task in WordPress. What can a plugin do? Almost anything. When I say that, I mean, as I've been coding up plugins over the years, you always have all these great ideas, and WordPress from the get-go has been built up with tons of APIs to be able to let you go in and be able to code up wonderful things. But there is sometimes that little thing that you want to do that you can't do in there. So that's why I say almost anything, but usually if you have an idea, there's always going to be good ways to do it. And so your two main tools to be able to implement those ideas will be actions and filters. I won't go into all the details about what these are, but these are your entry points inside of the code to be able to do a variety of things inside of WordPress. So actions will be your way to be able to register code that will be executed at key points during the WordPress execution to do a variety of things. You could add content to a WordPress site using action hooks. You could alter some of the core functionality. You could add your own panels in the admin. You could extend WordPress, create custom post types, modify the database, do all sorts of stuff inside of there. And that's all possible using action hooks. Then you have filters. Filters let you modify any, and I say again, almost any kind of data inside of WordPress before it goes out for display. So there you can hide things, modify content, add extra things inside of the content. Shortcode, in a sense, are almost the cousins of filters, and so they can let you go in there and add extra content as well when key things are triggered. So there's a lot of tools that you have in hand to be able to create these plugins, and really, if we just take a look at some numbers, there's over 1,000 action hooks, over 1,500 filter hooks. So there's a lot of tools out there and that can let you go in and really get your own touch, your own footprint anywhere within the WordPress architecture. There's actually a number of sites that list all the calls, all of these hooks and actions. And one great one, and I think it's a bit hard to see at the bottom there, but hookr.io. There's other ways to pronounce that, but they don't sound really nice. So, but that's a good way to be able to get access to all of these different lists of all of these hooks. Of course, other ways to figure out which ones to use would be to look out for samples that might be using these different actions and filters, but a site like that could give you a full listing. So kind of the big picture is that using these tools, you could do anything with WordPress. You could create large community-driven sites. You could create stores. You could create sites with a lot of dynamic content. Enhance the editor. Look at creating new importers. Look at creating ways of interacting with a bunch of these web services out there. Think of things like Instagram and Twitter and whatnot. I mean, possibilities are really endless into what you can do using a plugin. So once you have an idea, you've thought, well, maybe I could do this, and you've kind of looked at what's available in terms of actions and filters, and you think it's feasible. The next thing to do in terms of figuring out what your idea is would be to look at, has anybody else had the exact same idea that I've had, or a similar one? There are 32,000 plugins out there. There's a chance that somebody had the same idea you had. But again, you might have a better way of attacking the problem. That's quite possible. So the first thing you should do once you have your idea is try to look for others. Go on the WordPress site, try to do some keyword searches with the name you have for your plugin or what it's going to do, and see what comes up. If there's a plugin that comes out there, for example, if you have a great idea of enabling SEO optimization for your site, and you search for that, you'll see that there's some plugins out there that have extremely large download numbers that kind of have that market. Does that mean there's no way you could be successful at having another plugin that space? Not necessarily, but it means your chances are not super high. You should also check, very basics. Is the name taken that you're looking for? So if you already have an idea and the name for your plugin, well, search for it and see what comes up. Make sure there's no duplicates, but also see what comes up if you type that exact name for your plugin, because those will basically be your competitor when it comes to people searching for your plugin. Last point here is reserve the name as soon as you can. So once you figured out, I have a name for my plugin, I know what I'm going to do, apply to have the name reserved on the WordPress.org repository. Because somebody else could have the exact same idea and come up with a very similar name or the same name between the time that it takes you to have the idea and actually release your plugin. Now you don't need to have code ready at this step. You could just go in, apply, I'm going to release a plugin, and only release the code a month or two later, but at least you've reserved that name on the WordPress.org site. A few things to think about in terms of SEO optimization for your plugin name. So you've got to think about how people will be searching for your plugin. So they're going to be searching for it in two places. They could be going on the .org site and searching through the plugin list, or they could be in their admin and looking in there. Now that will affect a few things. They'll see more or less information. So if they're in the admin, all they're going to see is the name and the short description for your plugin. So you need to make sure that you have a catchy name and that you have a very concise short description for your plugin that very easily conveys what it does. If people are looking on the .org site, of course then you can have large descriptions and FAQs and all sorts of things, but that are two very different discovery mechanisms for users. You should also do general testing of, I mentioned before, checking who your competitors are and checking for main keywords to make sure that what else is going to come up when they're looking for what you've created. We're going to go into the coding aspects of creating your plugins. So there's a number of things that you need to consider as you're creating a plugin that will be released out there in the wild. The first two elements are the size of your plugin, and here I'm talking about code size. You want to make sure that you're writing code in an efficient way. I mean, some people will just download your plugin, open up the file and go, what do you mean there's 5,000 lines of code to do this little thing? And they might just not want to use your plugin just based on that basic fact that you just wrote a heck of a lot of code to do something that seems relatively simple. You also want to consider things like execution time. So of course, when somebody loads up your plugin on their site, the first thing they're going to look at is, well, is it slowing down my website? If it does, well, they might just boot you out right then and there. So you want to consider as you're writing code to try to be as efficient as possible. You want to make sure that you consider dividing code that's going to be presented in the admin section of a WordPress site versus code that's going to render to the front end of the site. So very basic check for the isAdmin function inside of your code to make sure that you're only going through all of the elements that are admin related when the user is actually logged in as an administrator. And the very last point is be careful of PHP warnings. Not all users will care about this, but those who have WP debug on their website will come back to you if you generate a lot of warnings or any warnings in your code and ask you to please go back and try to clean up these warnings because they don't want to have these popping up all over the place. Of course, these may not affect how your plugin actually works on the site, but it will, they are just things that come up as soon as a user turns on the debug mode. Consider user experience when you're creating a plugin. So start by looking at having very clean admin pages. In the back of your mind, you always have to think of what's going to happen when somebody first loads your plugin on their site. The first thing they're going to do, well, they're going to activate it and cross their fingers that their site won't go down. The next thing they're going to do is they're going to look at how to configure it to work. Of course, in some plugins case, it might just work right away, but very often you need to go and configure it. And so they'll go to your config page, and if they're scared by how complex your pages are, well, again, you might just get deleted very quickly, and they might go on to looking for the next plugin to do what they're looking to achieve. Make sure that your users never have to modify any files. The chief culprit here could be things like style sheets. So if you have a style sheet for your plugin or the output that you're generating, make sure that there's a way for the user to not have to modify a CSS file in your plugin distribution. The main reason behind that is that file's going to get blown away whenever you do an update. So you don't want to have users need to go inside of your plugin and modify anything. Make sure you have div tags with classes and IDs. Depending on your needs, to be able to have users go in and style all of the output that you generate. It's common courtesy, but if the person cannot make the output look and feel like the rest of their website, again, you might get discarded very quickly. Think about FAQs and documentation. The main reason for these, well, A, the user might be able to get up and running much quicker if you've provided good FAQs and documentation, but they're not going to be contacting you afterwards to try to figure out how to use your creation. Still in the domain of interfaces, consider how you're going to be laying out the plugin. If you have a lot of configuration options for it, you may want to go with a tabbed approach. And the only thing I wanted to point out here is there's a few different ways of doing it. A lot of older plugins have done kind of a square traditional approach, as we see up top for a plugin like Supercache. Or there's kind of a newer style that Jetpack introduced with version 3. And it's very easy to lift those CSS files and bring them into your own plugin, and then you can create an admin that's going to be similar as I'm showing below here. So that can just make it blend a little bit better with the rest of the admin interface. And so, I don't know, when I first saw Jetpack, I was like, wow, this is so nice. And users can catch on to that as well when they look at loading up a plugin that you've created to see that you've given some attention to how is it presented and how do you navigate around it. The next point is distribution license. So you want to make sure, if you're going to go the free approach, which a lot of developers do at least at first, is to make sure that your plugin complies to the GNU GPL v2 license. That is the license that you need to comply with if you're going to have your plugin distributed on WordPress.org. Now, this includes a number of things. Of course, your own code needs to comply to that, but that's easy. You wrote that code. But then anything else that you might be using in your plugin also needs to comply to that code. So what this means here is any PHP library that you've used inside of your code to simplify some tasks that you're doing needs to comply. Any JavaScript or any jQuery library also needs to comply. Now, to some lesser extent, icons and images. I mean, if you took an icon somewhere on a site that specifically said that it was maybe only for free use, or that you were supposed to buy, but took it and photoshopped it, well, technically you're not supposed to use those things in your plugin. Now, of course, the last one's a bit harder to find, but the first, the libraries and the JavaScript and jQuery, there's actually scans that go on the WordPress.org site looking for third-party libraries that do not comply. I know, as an example, I was using a jQuery Lightbox type plugin called FancyBox, and at some point I wanted to upgrade to the latest version to get some bug fixes and new functionality in my plugin. So I got FancyBox 2. Hey, that's great. I'm just going to load up the newest version of this plugin. It's going to fix all my problems, and I'll be on my way. I modified my plugin. I uploaded it. Within hours, I got an email from the plugins team saying, well, this FancyBox 2 just changed their licensing. They're using the MIT license. It's not compatible. So you need to change your code. So I had to go back, change the code. In my case, I just ended up reverting and looking for another one, and then eventually, a few days later, released another Lightbox library in my plugin to be able to do those things I had to do. But just be aware that it's not just you put the code up there and just cross your fingers. They actually actively go out and try to search for these things that would not comply with their licensing terms. Next, think about plugin security. I mean, of course, security is always a big thing to have in mind. So the first thing to mention here is that, again, WordPress.org actually does scans for kind of known insecure code patterns, trying to find those inside of all the plugins that are on the site. So if they do find one of these, what's going to happen is they're going to suspend your plugin right away and then ask you to go in and correct these problems. Now, what we're talking here is anything from known insecure library. I mean, everybody remembers the Thimtum Gate from a few years ago. So they were, as soon as they got bitten by that one, then they got a lot more proactive at trying to find these libraries. And as soon as one is known to be a problem, they'll just go off and make sure that they're not being used anywhere inside of the plugins. The other one could be they're looking for things like malicious code injection. So if you're doing any kind of database access, are you properly preparing your queries? Are you making sure that you're getting valid input? If you're loading external files and using relative paths, they're going to come down on you because, well, if your plugin is not in the default plugin installed directory, well, the relative path won't be the same, and an attacker could take advantage of that to be able to compromise your plugin. So there's a lot of things to consider as you're going about and writing your code, and you should be mindful of these things as you're creating your plugin, but also on the WordPress side, they try to catch these things and let you know. Now, when I said that you get suspended if you introduce a security issue in one of your plugins, what suspension means in the WordPress.org word is your plugin disappears from the face of the earth. So what that means is somebody who knows your plugin and tries to go to its page will just get a page saying this plugin does not exist. It's a bit harsh. I understand their concerns, but from a plugin developer's point of view, it's like, well, let's get going and let's try to fix these things so that you can get back. So then you can go back, modify your code, resubmit, email them, telling them your code is ready to look at, and then they will come back and reestablish your plugin online. Quick note on internationalization. I'm not going to go into details here, but as a plugin developer, you should consider putting in coding and the ability for your plugin to be translated. There's a great set of rules for this and guidelines on the WordPress site that will just show you the process of going in, putting all the right calls every time you output text to the screen to be able to have this text be translated by users afterwards as they're using your plugin. Now, from experience, you'll get some users that are going to be very dedicated and will send you translations. So I know in my case, well, it was easy to do a French one, but then I've had users in a number of other languages who enjoyed my plugin create these translation files and then send these back. So I was able to incorporate these inside the plugin for general distribution. Then there's the big one, and it's a lot about testing. So of course, if you're going to put out code out there, you have to consider trying to test that code in different environments, because in the end, if it doesn't work on a user's site, if we think back to our user trying to install a plugin, they might discard your code very quickly if it doesn't work. So some of the things to consider here is running on a single site versus running on a multi-site. When you're writing a plugin, there's specific things you need to do, for example, activation things that would be specific to a multi-site installation. So try to run both single-site and multi-site when you're looking at developing. Personally, I run a multi-site environment on my local machine, so I'm sure that I'm going to cover most cases by doing that. Make sure that you test your plugin with other plugins. So a site that's running your own plugin and only that might work perfectly. But then once you start to interact with other ones, there may be issues. One thing I can suggest here is try to load up the 10 most popular plugins out there. There's a chance that your plugin will coexist with one of these when a user tries to load it up, and so just make sure that everything works correctly in that context. Consider running on an HTTP unsecure site versus a secure connection. So that means, for example, make sure you never hard code an HTTP anywhere inside of your code, because if the user is running in a secure environment, they're going to start to get warnings and things popping up, and they're going to try to contact you or try to figure out how to work around these, but you want to keep that in mind. Now, that one's a bit harder sometimes for you to test, but do try to consider these when you're referencing any external files or any file paths inside of your code. jQuery is always a big one. I've referenced this in previous presentations. You want to make sure that you don't load up your own version of jQuery, and you want to make sure that you don't do things that could break a site that has a lot of jQuery in it. Multiple themes. You should try to test your plugin with at least more than one theme. A good tip could be just to run through 2010 through 2014. That could already give you a whole bunch of different layouts, and at least you'd be sure that it's going to run well for any user that has one of these base themes or a derivative of these basic building blocks. Make sure you've tested both on a local machine and a hosted site. That one might sound a bit silly, but I mean, I know I work on Windows, and as good as some of the local web servers are, sometimes they don't always behave the exact same way as a hosted Linux-based solution would go. So it's always good to make sure that you've tested code on both sides. And the very last one is consider different configuration option mixes. Now what I mean here is over time, or depending on the complexity of your plugin, you may have a lot of different permutations of configuration options. I know one of my plugins, I have probably over 150 options on it. So of course users are going to have different different sets of these configurations on their production site. Of course you can't build test cases for all of these, but at least try to have a few test cases that cover some of the broad, different, high-level options you consider to be the most common ones, so that you can at least run through these and make sure that nothing broke when you do an update before pushing it out. Now once you have a plugin out there, you've published it to the WordPress.org site, you have to think a little bit about how you're going to promote it. And one of the biggest tools is looking at your plugin page and dressing it up and making it as catchy and informational as you can for users that will consider your plugin for their website. Now one great tool for that is the plugin banner image. Now this first example here shows a site that does not use the banner image. So it's more of the older style plugin page, and so you'll get basic information like the name, a basic short description for it, and then a larger description of what the plugin does. Now you can dress that up very easily by creating your own banner. So there you can upload an image that will load up in the header of the plugin, and this image could be anything you want. It doesn't need to follow specific dimensions, but then you could have a basic picture like we have here. Now that does kind of give you a basic idea of what the plugin might do. Here it deals with schedules, there's a planner. That kind of can let a user at least imagine what it might do. You could go the approach where you're trying to describe a bit more about what your plugin does. So WordFence, it's going to help you secure your website. Now one thing you want to be careful about is you want to be careful about overlap. So if we look here, the person who made that banner did not really take a hard look at how it was going to be displayed on the website, and their plugin name overwrites it. Now I don't know if it's because they added security after WordFence at some point in time during their existence, but something there doesn't look quite right. Then you have authors that create really funky things and put them up on their plugin page. Of course, Yoast can do that, and he has what, 5.8 million downloads, so he can put up anything and get away with it. The image doesn't tell you a whole lot of what it does. I mean, yes, the little graph here tells you that this is the analytics, but it's creative, it's interesting, and it is eye-catching, I have to give him that. To be able to create things like these nice banners, well, you can use different tools online to be able to do things like get pictures and fonts. So a few resources that I know I use a lot. One is Morgfile, and that's a great site to be able to get royalty-free, open source, use them wherever you want images. So for example, that planner that I showed a few slides earlier, that's one of my plugins, and so I got that on Morgfile. It was easy, extremely high res, download it, crop it as I wanted, and be able to use it on my site, and I don't need to worry about using an image that that I don't have rights to. I've provided a few other examples at the bottom of the slide here. Now, you also may need some icons as you're creating your plugin. So if you need to do, for example, a little pop-up to bring up a calendar, well, it might be useful to have a nice calendar icon on your site. And so Icon Archive is my go-to resource for any kind of icons. Not all of them are free, but a lot of them are. Or they're free for non-commercial projects, which, well, if you're making a free plugin on the WordPress site, technically that's not a commercial thing. Yes, you may get a donation here and there, but that still qualifies as non-commercial. So it's a great resource. You can download as ICO files or PNGs or whatever else you want in tons of resolution. So it's very easy to take these and be able to bring these up on your site. And then fonts. If you're going to be creating a banner, you may want to have a nice attractive font. Font Squirrel here is my solution for that. Free, 100% free for commercial use fonts. You can use them anywhere you want on your site, and they have a nice selection to be able to create any of your images. Moving into monetization. So as I said at the top, you may want to make some money out of this. Now there are two main approaches that you can use to distribute your plugins out there. The first one is to go with the free plugin approach. So that means writing a plugin that's going to be hosted on WordPress.org. First thing I need to mention here is that only free plugins can be hosted on .org. That means that you cannot create a plugin that's going to have some free functionality and something behind a paywall. That's not allowed. You can only offer a plugin that's 100% functional. It could go and advertise a premium version. That's allowed. You can have donation links in there asking people to try to support you in your work. But all the functionality that's part of that plugin needs to be available as you install it. When you're going down the route of free plugins, you end up doing, or you end up trying to get what I call guilt-based support. So you're trying to get people to support your work through guilt. And so I've done that a number of ways. I mean, I'm not always necessarily proud of these, but I mean, one of them is just whenever I get an email through my personal website, I always try to just sign off by saying, well, I give them the answer and I ask them, well, please consider supporting the development of this plugin. I mean, is it a shameless plug? Maybe, but some people will then come back and throw a few dollars down your way. If you're on the .org side, of course, I wouldn't do that on the .org side. It would look a bit goofy, but what you can consider there is try to get people answers as quick as you can. People will often react in a very positive way when they get a quick turnaround to their support questions. Then if they're on the .org site, they can quickly see your plugin page. There's a donation link that you've provided in there, and then they can get back to your website and, again, send you a donation. Now, what you can expect in terms of revenues from a free plugin. Now, my most popular one has over 400,000 downloads, and what I've seen over time is about nothing to $100 per month. So just to give you an idea of what you can expect there. Now I do have 7 other plugins. Most of them have 6,000 to 10,000 downloads, so those don't tend to generate a lot of revenue attached to those plugins. Then of course the other big approach is you could go full on premium. So there are some plugins out there. Now a few examples of these are things like Gravity Forms or MailPoet that have gone the paid route. Now, so in this case, these people get direct revenue from their plugins. Now what they do need to do in that case is they need to find their own sales channels. So they need to find a place to handle selling the plugin, letting users download that code, the whole transactional aspect. So things like Theme Forest, they do offer a way for you to be able to post your plugins and sell them to your customers. But that's an extra step to think about as you're going to be able to get your plugin out there in the world. What you also need to consider is that in terms of updates to your plugin, the plugin will not, by being out there, will not be able to use the built-in WordPress update mechanisms that you get for free when you're getting hosted on the WordPress.org site. So you need to write a bit of code. It's not super complex, but you need to consider writing up that extra code, and again, it's going to need to go and fetch the newer versions of the files as you release updates to your paid plugin. You also need to consider things like potential piracy. I mean, in the end, you're delivering PHP code, so somebody could use it on more than one project if you have a license that's project-based, or somebody could just put it out there on a torrent or whatever the case may be, and then you're not going to see the revenue. Now there's ways to counter that piracy. You could go and have an activation key or have some way for the user to authenticate so that they need to have paid. But of course, since a plugin is PHP code, somebody could go in there, could try to find a way around that. So these are all things you need to think about if you're going to go the paid route. Now, revenue expectation, of course, is going to be higher, but you also have a higher user support expectation. As soon as you charge for something, people will expect that to get that higher level of support, that shorter time or that shorter turnaround. Expect you to implement features a lot more quickly or at all. I can't give you exact numbers. As I said, I've never done a premium plugin. There are some people that live out of this. I mean, a plugin like MailPoet, if you look at the author's presentation from WordCamp Paris, goes into the fact that they have a 5-people team behind that plugin, so they must be doing some decent revenues going down that path. But of course, at that point, you're really setting up more as a business, and you need to be ready to answer to the users that are going to be purchasing your creation. Another strategy that I've toyed with recently is what I call a fair use. Maybe I could also call it something more where I'm trying to more proactively give the users a little something and ask them to give me something back in return. So I had a user contact me earlier this year who was an integrator and who wasn't happy with the donation links that I had. I didn't have a ton of them, but I did have some donation links here and there. And since that user was delivering something to his customer, he didn't want the customer to see these donation links across the interface. So then I came up with a solution saying, well, okay, I didn't want to necessarily start to charge people to remove the donation links, but I decided, well, okay, I've put up some text. Might be a bit hard to read the copy, but I've put up some text saying, well, if you're going to use this, consider sending me a donation, and even if you don't, or in any case, check this box and all of the donation links will go away. Now I have seen a little bit of an uptick in terms of revenues. So if I take a look at over time, I did the change around January, and I do know that revenues have been a bit higher than they were in the past year. Will it work for everyone? I don't know, but it's something I've been experimenting with to go, well, you could just check that box on every site you make and never send me anything, but it makes people consider it a bit more, and you're giving them something that, well, they can turn off all these annoying links. Now, if you're going to decide which way you go, you might think that you can look at your competitors and see how many people are using their plugins, and to get an idea of what your market size might be. Now, one thing I want to mention here is that if you look at their download stats, or even if you look at their total download counter, that download counter, it does not indicate a 1-to-1 ratio to users for a number of reasons. The first one is that downloads for updates are also rolled into the download count. So anybody who's getting an update to a plugin, that adds a +1 to how many times that plugin has been downloaded. Now, depending on how frequently that plugin gets updated, those numbers could go up and up and up, and almost artificially. I mean, somebody could release an update daily and just keep racking up those numbers. If you're looking to become more popular, maybe that's a strategy to be able to get out there and try to bump your numbers and get people to use it. Heck, you could set up a bot that just keeps downloading. Anyway, less nice ways to try to become more popular, but just things to consider. That download number is really just how many times was that zip file downloaded off of their servers. Something else to consider is those download numbers also include things like somebody who downloaded it, tried it for 5 minutes, deleted it, and went on their way. So that's not necessarily a user. Maybe it's a potential customer for you, but it's not necessarily an active user of that specific plugin out there. In general, so what I found, I mean, most users don't want to pay. Everybody's looking for a free solution to do something, but they do want everything. I'll get into that a bit more as I get into the support section. Users can be quite demanding of your plugins. Now, one thing you can think about is a plugin can really become something that's part of your portfolio. So myself, I know I've had customers come to me and ask me to create new features for them, and they funded these new features, and these were rolled into the free plugins. Or I've had people use my free plugins and then come to me and ask me to develop custom work for them, create custom plugins for their own website. So it can really be kind of a gateway to get leads, to get people to see your work and to look at hiring you to do more. So supporting your community. Once your work is out there, you're going to get questions. The more popular your plugin gets, the more questions you'll get. That's just inevitable. If you have a paid plugin out there, you're going to have more demanding users. That does not mean that the free users are not demanding, but they'll just be a bit more demanding. Try to avoid answering general WordPress questions. Sometimes people will ask you something and you just realize that they just don't understand how to use basic WordPress. So when you get these, try to redirect these to the general WordPress forums. It's a bit harsh sometimes to do, but you don't necessarily want to start to just support everyone using WordPress. Managing expectations, I find, is always one that's interesting, because users, as I've mentioned, are very demanding. So they'll want to try to get the answer as soon as they can. I mean, I've literally had a guy from Indonesia write to me a few weeks ago, which was morning here, and I told him I'd get back to him in the evening. I do this on the side, so I don't do this all day long. I got an email back from him 3 hours later saying, oh, so how's your progress? I mean, the guy's in Indonesia. He should figure out that not everybody's on the same time zone as he is. And so I just had to reset the expectation even more that, well, I'm in this time zone. I'll get back to you a bit later. So if you at least give them a general idea of when you think you'll get to their question, it can help settle things. And most users are very understanding, but at least if you tell them, well, okay, I got your question, I'm going to look into it, they'll understand what to expect. Try to keep all support in one place. So I made the mistake early on, and I'm trying to correct it, of having both the WordPress.org forum and my own site with my plugin pages with comments enabled. So you end up getting questions in both places, and what happens there is people can't help each other. A question might be asked in both places, and if somebody's looking only in one place, well, they won't necessarily see that the answer is already on the other place. So, and you're going to miss out on advanced users actually finding the answers for other people. So if you're diluting the user base, if it's on your own site, you cannot have an advanced user go in and reply to somebody else very easily. They can, but it happens a lot more on the official forum. So I'm trying to consolidate everything now to the forum, but it's not necessarily easy once people have had a habit of contacting you through comments on your own website. Consider doing things like video tutorials. I've started to do these recently, and these are very good tools to be able to get people to use. And I just see that this is getting cut off. Screener.com is a great tool that's free that you can use to do 5-minute videos. Basically, it does a screen capture of your screen, captures your audio feed, and then you can do video tutorials very easily. There's another one called Screencast-O-Matic. I haven't tried it, but it offers similar services for free. And I know I've had great feedback so far on these videos. People really enjoy them, and they want more. Feature requests. Of course, I've mentioned this a few times, people always want more. You'll get good and bad ideas when you get a plugin out there. Somebody could ask you to do something that will just make your plugin be 3 times as good, and it's going to be something that you didn't think of, but it's a really great idea to put into your plugin. But other people will ask for it to do everything. So kind of the Swiss Army knife of plugins, and they're like, well, could it do this and this and this? And sometimes what you have to be careful about is feature creep. A plugin that's very nice and very simple to use and that will address a very specific issue, if you start to add too much to it, will lose some of these things. It will get a more complicated configuration panel. It will have bigger code. So what I want to say here is don't be afraid to say no. Sometimes you just have to, especially if you're doing a free plugin and somebody's asking you for some gigantic thing. They're not offering to fund the work, they're just asking you for this big amount of functionality. Sometimes you just have to say, well, that's not something that I'm planning to add to the plugin. Sorry, I hope you have good luck finding something else that will suit that need. I want to touch upon update frequency a little bit, and I know I'm getting close to the 45-minute mark. Just to mention here that you're going to be pushing updates out in 2 circumstances. Typically, you'll fix bugs, or you're going to add new functionality. Now, surprisingly, I've had users contact me and say, you update your plugin too much. I was surprised at first, but then I put myself in their shoes and went, well, okay, the user needs to, first of all, read through the changelog to get an idea of what I did, then install the new version, then test their site, and if they're an integrator and they've used my plugin in a lot of sites, well, all of their customer sites have to be updated. etc., etc. So I understand that point of view. From my perspective, somebody asks me for a bug fix or a new feature, I want to get it to them as soon as possible. So you kind of have to balance out how often you get these new versions out there. Just consider rolling them up in a few of those updates together if you can, so that not everybody needs to update their website. Last but not least, I want to talk very briefly on dropping features. That's always a hard one. So if you have a plugin that you've had for a while, I mean, my oldest plugin is 9 years old now. And so there's a lot of features that have been added to the plugin, and there's a lot of people out there using it. Now, once in a while, you do have that thought of, well, I want to add something new, but it means removing something else. As much as possible, try to avoid. I mean, it's hard to say, but if you remove something, there's a chance that one user out there, their website is going to break because you chose to remove that functionality. There's no easy way to poll your users. You don't know who's using your plugins, so the best you could maybe try to do is put a survey in your plugin config page and try to ask people what they're doing. But of course, it would require them to go into the page, fill up a form, all these things. In some instances, I know I've removed functionality, and cross your fingers and hope that nobody panics. If you think that it's something that's lesser used, I mean, you can go by support questions and know that if nobody ever asked a question about something, maybe it's safe to remove it. But do try to avoid dropping features as much as you can inside of your creations. So in conclusion, it's a bit hard to read perhaps, but you can't necessarily expect, money, success, fame when you're thinking about developing a plugin. But on the other hand, you're giving back to the community. I mean, plugins are kind of the heart of WordPress. If WordPress had just been the core and never had a plugin architecture, I don't know that it would be what it is today. So if you do have a great idea, don't be afraid to go out there, create that plugin. You'll definitely get users' respect. People who use your work will love having that on their website and will definitely talk about it and let other people know that they like your plugins. There are some ways to monetize it, as I've explained through the presentation, but there's definitely things to consider and different obstacles on the way to be able to get to the glory and fame. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I know I might have cut it a bit close to lunch, so you can grab me at lunch as well if you have questions to ask. Questions? No?
Je peux-tu poser ma question en français?
Bien sûr.
Les pages de réglage de plugins, les auteurs, ils ne s'entendent pas sur où les mettre dans l'architecture du dashboard. Des fois, il y en a qui prennent un item de premier niveau puis qui se mettent plein de sous-pages. Il y en a qui se mettent en haut complètement, là, comme Jetpack puis d'autres affaires de même. Toi, as-tu essayé plusieurs choses? Qu'est-ce que tu recommandes?
Ma règle générale, c'est un plugin simple qui a une seule page de configuration assez simple. Je la mets comme une sous-page sous le menu Settings, Réglages. Par contre, dès qu'un plugin commence à vraiment avoir plusieurs sections spécifiques, je me mets mon propre item avec des sous-sections, mais je le mets dans le bas de la liste.
Okay. Est-ce que tu as montré des tables aussi? Est-ce que les tables peuvent remplacer,
Dans mon cas, ce que j'ai fait, c'est que, oui, les tables peuvent remplacer. Tu as deux approches. Tu peux y aller dans une approche où tu as une correspondance entre les deux. Donc, dans mon cas, à date, ce que j'ai fait, c'est qu'avant ça, mon plugin avait un item principal, 4 sous-items. Mais quand tu cliques dessus, ça change aussi le tab. Okay. Mais tu pourrais aussi avoir un seul item, puis avoir tes tables à l'interne, puis pas du tout encombrer le menu principal. Oui.
Dans ta section test, tu n'as pas parlé de combien de versions de WordPress lui-même dans le passé tu testes?
Personnellement, j'utilise seulement la version courante. Dans mes tests, je veux dire, comme je disais, je fais ça dans mes temps libres, donc j'ai pas un arsenal et du temps infini pour tester.
Mais est-ce que ça cause problème au niveau du soutien? Est-ce que tu as beaucoup d'utilisateurs
Non, j'ai pas de problème là-dessus. En général, l'API de plugin n'a pas beaucoup changé au fil des versions. C'est sûr que bon, tu as des trucs majeurs comme les custom post types dans version 3, des trucs comme ça, mais j'ai très rarement des gros problèmes. C'est surtout, les seuls problèmes que j'ai habituellement, c'est dans la nouvelle version, il y a un petit truc à changer pour que quelque chose fonctionne, mais ça n'a jamais brisé les vieilles versions, en tout cas dans mon cas.
OK. Merci.
De rien. D'autres questions? More questions?
J'ai installé plusieurs plugins sur mes sites WordPress et il n'y a pas vraiment de guidelines sur les numéros de version, comment est-ce qu'on fait ça. Je n'ai vu des vertes et des pommeurs. J'ai même vu à un moment donné la date où est-ce que le plugin était sorti, c'était le numéro de version. Fait que, comment est-ce que vous décidez vos numéros de version?
C'est complètement arbitraire. Je veux dire, moi, personnellement, je dirais que ça dépend des plugins, ça dépend de la fréquence. Mon plugin le plus populaire, j'ai comme 4 niveaux de version. Donc, ça va être 5.3, .2, whatever. Mais c'est surtout parce que je sors des versions des fois à chaque quelques jours parce que j'ai des demandes d'utilisateurs. Les plugins où je fais moins de mises à jour, j'y vais souvent des chiffres un peu plus ronds, 1.1, 1.2, etc.
Ben c'est ça. Moi, je pensais peut-être prendre, si on peut dire, l'architecture de WordPress pour les numéros de version. Ce qui est, chaque version majeure, c'est un .1 de plus, si on peut dire. Puis le .1 après, c'est les bug fixes, en gros.
Oui. Je me suis rendu à 4 chiffres parce que je trouvais que 3, ça roulait quand même assez vite, que tu faisais 10 updates, tu changeais le deuxième chiffre, tu sais, donc 1.1.1 à 1.1.9, je trouvais que ça allait tellement vite que j'arrivais à 1.2 que c'est pas que j'ai rajouté l'autre chiffre, mais bon, ça c'est à la guise du développeur.
Ouais, ben c'était juste savoir qu'est-ce que
ma stratégie, c'est ça. Un plugin que j'update à plusieurs fois par semaine, j'y vais avec 3-4 chiffres. Un plugin que j'update moins souvent, j'y vais à 2 chiffres.
OK. Merci.
De rien. Anyone else? Mike is a great...
Oui. Est-ce qu'il y a des bonnes pratiques à suivre pour la désinstallation des plugins? Parce que des fois, avec l'API des settings, les options vont se déliter automatiquement. Oui. Mais encore là, c'est nébuleux, donc je sais pas.
C'en est une difficile parce que tu as toujours... il faut faire attention entre désactivation et désinstallation, premièrement, parce qu'il y a 2 hooks séparés. Lors d'une désinstallation complète, la meilleure chose, enlever toutes les options spécifiques au plugin, enlever toutes les tabs custom, si on a créé des tabs custom dans l'outil. Quand on fait seulement désactiver, moi, je laisse tout en place. Tout ce qui est setting, tout ça, parce que la personne peut juste être en train de tester, va vouloir réactiver, évidemment. C'est sûr que si la personne désactive, puis ensuite fait juste déliter les fichiers après manuellement sur leur site FTP, ils vont garder des options dans leur table, ils vont garder des trucs comme ça, mais bon, ils n'ont pas fait la méthode d'effacement officielle, donc il faut qu'ils s'attendent à ce qu'il puisse rester des choses derrière. Okay. Ce qui est important aussi de considérer, c'est des trucs comme essayer de penser à implémenter un mécanisme d'import et d'export de configuration.
Okay.
Parce que souvent, un utilisateur, surtout s'il utilise le plugin sur plusieurs sites ou qu'il veut faire une migration, veulent être capable d'aller juste amener des fois les settings, la façon qu'ils ont configuré le plugin pour un site en particulier, puis ils veulent juste répliquer sur un autre site sans avoir à essayer de figurer où sont les options, tout ça. Donc, quelque chose qui peut faire comme un export en CSV, puis ensuite être capable de réimporter puis aller remettre les options dans la base de données. Les utilisateurs apprécient beaucoup, ça les incite à utiliser plus un plugin puisque c'est facile pour eux de répliquer ce que le plugin fait sur plusieurs sites sans avoir à bidouiller manuellement toutes les options.
Cool. Merci.
Ouais.
Oui, salut. Moi, juste concrètement, combien de temps de support technique ça peut représenter? Tu sais, mettons, tu releases un plugin, puis tout ça, répondre aux courriels, enligner un peu les utilisateurs, des explications, des fois faire les petites mises à jour de bugs, tout ça mineur, puis tout ça, ça peut représenter combien de temps environ?
Je dirais que je pense en moyenne 2 à 3 heures par semaine à répondre à des questions. Grosso modo, c'est sûr que des fois, il y a des trucs un peu plus impliqués, là, mais aussi, moi, mes plugins sont assez matures, donc à certains moments, j'ai passé beaucoup plus de temps que ça, mais en général, je m'attends à peu près à 2-3 heures par semaine.
Pour l'ensemble de tes plugins actuellement?
Oui.
Okay. Merci.
J'ai principalement des questions sur un de mes plugins le plus populaire. Les autres, c'est plus rare que je reçois des questions.
Merci.
All right. Well, I guess that covers it, unless anybody has more questions. Thank you very much for your time.